funny but sad story of I was in a meeting with a legislator a couple of years ago on removing taxes on gold and silver coins and bullion. And we were 10 minutes into the meeting where I was explaining the issues with the Constitution. I was explaining that it's an inefficient form of revenue collection. And she said to me, okay, I got it. I'm following everything you're saying. That's great. But what does this have to do with soup?
Okay, we are here at VRIC in Vancouver, and we have the pleasure of speaking with JP Cortez, the Executive Director for the Sound Money Defense League. How are you doing?
Doing well. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. Glad to have you. So I wanted to just start off with some basic questions, like what brought you into silver, gold, or the monetary system? How did you end up giving these wonderful speeches?
The short story is Ron Paul. I was in school around in the early 2010s. I actually was pretty politically agnostic, and one day I was assigned a school project, and I was assigned a random congressman which to do a report on.
Really?
And that random congressman happened to be Ron Paul.
Wow.
And that sort of sent me down the rabbit hole of, obviously, Ron Paul's work led me to the Mises Institute, Ludwig von Mises, F.A. Hayek, these Nobel Prize-winning Austrian free market economists. And so I studied at the Mises Institute when I went to college at Auburn University, which it just happens to be right across the street from the Mises Institute.
Oh, wow.
So I studied there, and I obviously there's an economic side to this, and we can talk about the esoteric, the graphs, and we can talk about why sound money is important from the economic side, but there's also a very real human element to inflation being a policy choice and people having their savings zapped away because of decisions that are made by a politician.
Yes.
There's a moral failing that's happening there that needs to be addressed.
I agree.
So that really is the why for me. I learned the economics of what it looks like when a country doesn't have sound money, how a government will continue to grow and bloat, how a country will fight global wars of choice all around the world without the guardrails that sound money provides. So it was incredibly important, and so the economics is there obviously, but there's a human element to it and a moral element to it that's equally as important for me.
Yeah, wow, so you got drawn into it almost from the moral aspect of seeing that the hurt done to the population without really them recognizing what's going on, and that's exactly what got me into it as well, so it was very cool. And so now at this point, you're even working with states, legalizing sound money in the state, which, per Constitution, I guess, is supposed to be lawful money already.
Right.
But however, now we're having to bring it in under kind of this legal system.
It would be great if people just understood, if lawmakers certainly understood that gold and silver are the only form of money mentioned in the Constitution, and that means that it shouldn't be taxed and it shouldn't be regulated and have restrictions imposed on it. But unfortunately, today's politicians are not necessarily faithful to the United States Constitution, believe it or not.
So have you found that, like you're kind of saying, you have to go over that with them to show that it, actually constitutionally speaking, this is already supposed to be lawful, and they're kind of unaware of that sometimes even.
Absolutely, I would say the majority of times. I think something I've said before is that in the United States, there are 50 states, all of which have their own state legislature, which means there are about 7,000, a little more than 7,000 elected legislators in the United States, the vast majority of which had never heard the term sound money, have never given thought to ideas about money. Where does money come from? What makes a good money?
Wow.
What traits do we want in a good me? Are there things about money that we should avoid? These are questions that are never really asked or considered. There's a funny story, even funny but sad story of I was in a meeting with a legislator a couple of years ago on removing taxes on gold and silver coins and bullion. And we were 10 minutes into the meeting where I was explaining the issues with the Constitution. I was explaining that it's an inefficient form of revenue collection. And she said to me, okay, I got it. I'm following everything you're saying. That's great. But what does this have to do with soup? And I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean?
Oh.
And she said, well, this meeting was about bullion, right? I thought we were talking seasonings. I thought we were talking soup flavorings.
Wow.
And it's jarring to hear something like that, right? Because while this person certainly means well, I'm sure, these many times are people that probably shouldn't be making decisions that affect many of our lives. And so ultimately, it's up to the individual, to adopt your own gold standard, to understand how markets move and how this counterfeit, that is to say the United States Federal Reserve note, that fraud, because that's what it is. It's a debt liability. It's not an extinguisher of debt. It's not an asset. It's a debt liability. It's an IOU. That fraud at the very top is what allows and even incentivizes all of the other fraud that governments do. You cannot fight endless wars if you cannot fund endless wars. You can't grow this bureaucracy into this massive structure that we're living under today without having this money that endlessly allows the bureaucracy to continue to grow. So it's incredibly important. It's not just sufficient. It is a necessary component to human prosperity, human flourishing, America flourishing.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you're saying that. I wonder if the people, the governments, like you say, need it to expand wars, all the things that grow the government. But doing so depletes the population, the average person, of their purchasing power. And yes, it's interesting. Do you think that, so are the politicians being selfish about it, or that they're so far removed from it that they don't even think about this, or have you found them, have states kind of fought back at you in the way that they're saying, how dare you bring up such things? Is it something that you find the states are upset at you about when you approach them with this, that you might be attacking their own foundation of growth kind of in that way?
That's not something I come across often, honestly. Okay. What I do come across is just general lack of education.
Yeah.
There's been no thought given to this.
Wow.
In many cases, the reality is, and probably with most Americans, but most elected officials too, if you ask them, they'd probably tell you that the dollar is backed by gold currently. Today.
Really?
So there's just a massive lack of education, a disconnect between understanding economics, Austrian economics, free market economics, and the world that we're living in today. So in some cases it's lack of education. In some cases, governments see industries and sectors and businesses as cash cows. They see them as somewhere to draw revenue from. Okay. So when you tell them, hey, gold and silver shouldn't be taxed, what they see is the dollar signs in the state's coffers going down.
Sure.
And they don't like that.
I suppose.
So they'll be opposed for that reason. But one of the great things about this sound money movement and our experience, so this is now the Sound Money Defense League's 11th year in existence doing this kind of legislation. And what we have found is that the biggest, best tool that we have is that this is a grassroots movement. The Sound Money Defense League is funded by Money Metals Exchange, which is an online precious metals dealer. And our greatest asset is taking this Money Metals customer list that has tens of thousands of email addresses of customers, paying customers from all over the country that have a vested interest in gold and silver laws, that are willing to act because they are actively buying the metals and transacting in the metals, and reaching out to them in times of key hearings and key votes and telling them, hey, here are the committee members, here are their phone numbers, their email addresses, here's a pre-written message for you. We just need you to contact the legislator. Because more than any other tool, more than experts going up and talking about how great the legislation is and explaining to legislators that it's in the Constitution, more powerful than any of that is hearing from people in the state, getting representatives having their switchboards blown up and their email inboxes blown up from people in the state saying, we want this, we elected you, you represent us.
Yeah.
And so that has been debatably really our most powerful tool, and I can say for certain, because I've heard legislators say this on Senate floors and on House floors, that, wow, we had no idea that this was such a big issue in our state. We had never even heard of this.
Really?
And after dozens of hundreds of phone calls and emails and written letters, wow, we understand that this is a big deal in our state. And that's not me lying or telling a story that's one of those fish stories that like it grows every time.
Right.
I'm sincere, and there's proof, there's footage of legislators admitting to this. And yes, it's such a strong realization that, like, especially in the States, realistically, you don't really have power in Washington, D.C., right? You can call your congressman if you want, an aide might answer the phone, they might deliver the message, you probably won't hear back. But that's not the case in Nashville or in Bismarck or in Tallahassee or in Atlanta, right? In state capitol buildings, individuals, constituents still have so much power because state legislators many times are not used to organized effort and organized pressure. So when there's a sound money bill and they get 20 phone calls and 20 emails, they realize, oh wait, we're really onto something. Something really big is happening here. That's why it's so important for everyone in the United States, be it on sound money or on other issues that are meaningful to you or to liberty or freedom or your conception of those things. You have so much power, so you should be an active participant in your state legislature. If you take away nothing else from this, realize that you have power in the state to affect the change that you want to see.
Wow, okay, that's great information.